Hi there, welcome back to the channel. Today, a follow-up to last week's episode. Last week's episode was zero disappointment gear. Gear that I've purchased, and it was a top 11 list, gear that I've purchased that just didn't disappoint. It performs every time I turn it on or every time I use it. And I just have no regret buying this gear. Today, I have the other list, the maximum disappointment gear. This is gear that I purchased and it just disappoints me either every time I use it, every time I turn it on. Some of this gear I don't own anymore, and for good reason. Some of this gear I purchased knowing full well that it wasn't the best gear. More on that when we get to it. Let's get into the list. At number 11, this was more of a lesson. The Roland Digital Effects Processor 3, or the DEP 3. This was the lesser model than the DEP 5. And I thought to myself, I don't need a 5. I'll save some money and get the 3. Big mistake. I owned the DEP 3 over a weekend. I took it back the following Monday and got myself a DEP 5. And I was a lot happier. And I actually still own that processor. I gave it to my friend and he used it for a while, then didn't use it. And recently he returned it to me. Also, another unit was the Roland S330, which is a sliced down version of the Roland S550 sampler. I already owned one S550 sampler and I decided that an S330 would be more than enough. I was wrong. So I returned it and got an S550. Anyway, so that's more of a lesson to me, and maybe you've purchased some lesser models and then regretted it. Sometimes you save quite a bit of money and it's fine. You don't need some of the features of the more powerful model. But in this particular case, well, for both of these items, it was better that I just didn't settle and I got the better model. Coming in at number 10, Asus RTX 4070. And I'm just going to say this like it is. What a piece of junk. I purchased mine off of Amazon about a year and a half ago. When it showed up, it looked like it had been sold and returned, and then it got sold to me as new. But I didn't let that deter me since I bought it for myself as a gift during the December holidays. I put it into my music computer, and the big plan was to use it to render these videos. I needed something faster. I was currently using a GTX 980 Ti, which is no slouch. It's a good card. But the 4070 was a lot faster, and it does render my videos for the channel a lot faster. The problem is I get page switching, monitors flicker, they flash on and off. Sometimes I get just bizarre lines through everything. And then sometimes my monitors will say, can't sync with the graphics card because the graphics card wants me to sync at 63 hertz, not 60 hertz. So within maybe a month of owning that card, I contacted Asus to return the item and have it repaired. But I really started getting into producing more videos and I couldn't be without the card, so I didn't return it. Lately, it's just been worse. And I think I have 2 years. So this December, if I haven't returned it by then, I'm just going to be out that money. I think I paid $6.99 for it. That's what I have on the list over there. Maybe it was $6.50. Graphics cards were still going for a premium at that time, and it's just not been worth the headaches. Anyway, I really got saddened when EVGA left the graphics card arena, and I watched a really good episode by Jay's 2 Cents. If you haven't seen it, I think it was from him, or it might have been from Gamers Nexus, where they talked about EVGA getting out of producing graphics cards. And I think that's a shame because the 980 Ti that I have is from EVGA and it just works. And the Asus 4070, not so much. Number 9, Roland U220. And in a way, I did this to myself. I knew it wasn't working, and I purchased it for $50. And the guy sent it to me from LA, and I'm not kidding. This is how he boxed it up. He got a flat piece of cardboard, laid the unit on it, put another piece of flat cardboard, and just wrapped duct tape around it. That's how he sent it to me. And of course it didn't work, but I already knew it didn't work. I opened it up, plugged it in, turned it on, and guess what? It worked. So I buttoned it up, put it in my rack, turned it on, and it didn't work. So I thought, what could it be about the cover being on that would make it not work? This might be helpful to anybody that has a U220. Apparently, the main connector that goes to the power supply that's on the main board, the solder joint can get dry and get loose. So there's a big bundle of wires that come out of the power supply, loop over, and go into this big connector. And that connector was loose, and I could tell that it was loose. So I disconnected the board and lifted it up. And when I wiggled the connector, I could see that it was actually raising some of the traces. Well, not the actual traces, but the solder joints off of the board. So what I did was I just used some solder wick, got that old solder off, flowed some new solder, put it back together, and it worked. Now that it was working, I could tell that the display was bad. It had some lines of dots missing, and this is common with some of these Roland pieces of gear around about that time. The S760 sampler has the same problems. You'll see lines of dots missing. I bought a replacement display, and I think it was about $30. It was easy to install. It was plug and play, essentially. And so now I'm into it for about 80 bucks. And I used it for a while listening to it, but I never used it on anything. I owned a couple of Roland D550s, which are essentially D50s in a rack mount package. And the U220 just wasn't very good compared to those. So I sold it. I sold it to a guy, I think, for about 50 bucks. He lived in Miami. I gave him free shipping, cost me $35 for shipping. So I think I made, about 20 bucks on it, and cost me 80 bucks with the display. So I lost about $60, but at least it's not in a landfill somewhere. So that's just a lesson of me doing stupid things. Number 8, Kobe 8-inch Kairos tablet. This is an Android tablet that I purchased probably about 10 years ago, somewhere around about then. I bought it for $100. And I thought that was a really good deal at the time. And my plan was to sync it up with this little JVC Addiction action camera that I'd purchased, or maybe use it in the studio. And it was just a piece of junk. It didn't have a very good app store on it. I don't think they want to pay the licensing fees for that. And so I just got frustrated with it, and what I would have to do is actually download from different sites applications and then try to install them manually. And sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. I was able to put a few games on it, but some of the applications that I needed to get on it to use in the studio just wouldn't work. So I had a friend whose 11-year-old son was constantly whining, "Mommy, Daddy, Jimmy's got a tablet. Why don't I have a tablet?" And I said, "Here, you can have mine." "Really? Wow." And I thought, don't thank me. And his mother thanked me, and I said, don't thank me. It's really not a very good tablet. I said, it's going to be a nightmare. And she said, "Does it have games on it?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "Well, by the time he figures out it's no good, maybe we'll buy him an iPad." Okay, so if you're watching this episode and you haven't seen the top 11 list from last week, which was gear with zero regret, gear that just works, you should definitely watch that one too. Coming up next, number 7, Roland Juno 106. This is actually on last week's as an honorable mention, because if it didn't have those stupid chips encased in that plastic, maybe it would be reliable. But I've owned mine from brand new for 41 years, and I've replaced chips at least 6 times on it. Now I've had the acetone process done on it and I have chip holders. I can just replace them myself. So that's a lot easier. You're supposed to go in and set, there's potentiometers to adjust and it has to be calibrated. I don't do that. Providing you're not running it with all the voices layered in the layered mode by pressing poly 1 and poly 2 at the same time, you don't notice the slight drift in the oscillator, so it's fine. But, and I could play around with it, but I'd probably just make it worse. I love and hate my Juno 106 all at the same time. So it made this list. I've owned it for 41 years. On the previous list, I didn't put anything on the main list that I hadn't owned for at least a decade. There were a few honorable mentions like the Stream Deck that I've owned for 5 years. And the reason why that I made them an honorable mention is because I haven't owned them for at least a decade. Love my Stream Deck XL. Here, I've owned this for 41 years. Now, the graphics card from Asus, I've owned it for 18 months? But I really don't need to own that for 41 years to tell you it's garbage. Don't buy one. Next up, number 6, and I might get some grief over this, Aphex Aural Exciter Type-C 104. So I purchased one of these circa 1988, 1989, somewhere around about then. It was late 80s. I drank the Kool-Aid that this thing could add this spectral harmonics or harmonic distortion to my mixes and just make them sound better. But it sounded like a really crappy EQ, quite honestly. It never really did anything for my mixes. Maybe my mixes were just really bad, but I just don't think it really did anything. It brightened them up, but I could have done that with EQ. I know a lot of guitar players love exciters in their effects chain. And so if you like that, more power to you, but never worked for me. I think I paid $299 for it, brand new. And I sold it for, I think, $199 when I moved to California, put it on Craigslist. Didn't cost me anything to sell it. And the guy that came and picked it up said he was a guitar player. So I'm guessing he probably really enjoyed it. Number 5, Motu 2408 Mark I. Now, you've probably seen my episode, More Inputs and Outputs for Your Audio Interface on a Budget. And the Motu 2408 is something that I really push and say, yeah, you can pick up one for $50 and then you can add 8 more inputs or outputs through ADAT connectivity. It's really good for standalone conversion. The disappointment that I got for the 2408 was because me and a friend both purchased 2408s with the 324 card, the PCI 324 card, at the same time. And that was called a core system. And it was $995. And I think we only had that for about 2 years or so before Microsoft went from Windows XP to Windows 7. And the 324 card, apparently they couldn't write drivers that would make it work under Windows 7. I'm not sure why that was. But what they wanted you to do was to buy the 424 card now. And that was something like $500, which made no sense to me at the time. Just made me very bitter about it, made me hate Motu. You know, a company that prior to that I thought was a really great company. I owned a 2408. I actually had a couple of them plugged into my 324. And I had a 308 plugged in, which gave you a lot of SPDIF connectivity. And now that just upset me. So what I decided to do was to get something that was more future-proof. I'm not sure if anything is totally future-proof, but what I decided to go with was an RME UFX. And I've never looked back. It's a USB interface. One thing everybody was telling me that was recommending that I get the RME was, as soon as Microsoft comes out with a new version of Windows, RME is on it. They have the drivers out very quickly, and they're always updating the software. I went mixerless recently, about 6 months ago. Never looked back. The RME UFX Total Mix software is running on one of my really old iPads, a 9.7 Gen 2, and it works flawlessly. Never had any trouble with that. But the Motu, I still use 2 of them for standalone conversion. I like them for that, but I'll never forgive them for making me spend almost $1,000, and then 2 years later, they wanted me to spend another $500 to continue using it. Wasn't going to do it. Sorry. Next up, number 4, Alesis ADAT XT. You know, once again, a friend and I, the same friend that bought the 2408s, we were moving through technology. We started off using a 8-track analog tape machine that he had, a Fostex R8, I think that's what it was called. And that was a really cool device, and it worked really well, but it was only 8 tracks. So then what we did is we moved to ADAT XTs. We bought 2 of them, and if you bought 2, they had a special deal on. You got a BRC, which is the big remote control, for free. So I charged it on my credit card. He paid me back for his ADAT, and we put them both in a rack, hooked up the BRC, and it was awesome. We had 16 tracks of digital audio now. Didn't have to worry about noise reduction using Dolby anymore, a registered trademark of Dolby Laboratories. I don't know if I need to say that, but there you have it. And we didn't need to use noise reduction anymore. And just everything sounded cleaner and better. And I know some people are going to say analog tape is better, but you know, for us, we were doing a lot of demos in country and pop, and having the ADATs was just great. And for a year, they really were great. Then his ADAT started to develop problems, and this is only after a year. It was probably a month or 2 after the warranty expired. And we would locate to a certain point, and mine would get there and it would quickly lock up. It would, you know, it would shutter backwards and forwards and find it. And then his would do this. And it would take 20, 30 seconds. And it was a little bit of a damper on creativity, but it still worked. He gave me that ADAT probably a couple of years ago, and it's sitting over there in a rack, and I actually am selling it. I don't have any use for it, and it appears to work now. And at one time it was exhibiting an error code, and it's not showing that error code anymore, so I don't know what's going on. But that was disappointing. We had purchased 2 ADAT XTs, and 50% of the ADAT XTs that we had purchased were not functioning at optimal levels after only a year. So that was kind of disappointing. Number 3, Roland MT32. And I finally remembered the full story on this. A friend had 2 Roland MT32s. And what he wanted to do was borrow my Yamaha DX7 2FD. And I said, no. And he said, well, what about your TX7? Because I owned a TX7, which is a little wedge-shaped DX7, an entire DX7 in a little box. And I said, okay, I'll let you borrow that. And he let me borrow the MT32s, and the MT32s are just garbage. But more on that in a moment. So then he said, well, how would you feel about just swapping? And I said, no, I don't particularly like the sound on them. I don't think they're particularly good. You know, obviously they're not a D50. I don't even think they're a U220. And I was really looking for D50 sound, at least as close as I could get to it for a budget. And I thought that the MT32s might have worked out, but they didn't. And so I said, no, I'm really not interested. I'd like to swap back. And he said, well, I also have an Atari monitor, a color monitor. And I noticed you have 2 Roland S550s. Have you ever seen them in color? And I said, no. So he brought them over, and I got a SCART plug, and I was able to plug one of the S550s into his Atari monitor. And so I saw it in color for the first time. He said, I'll give you the Atari monitor and the 2 MT32s for your TX7. And I acquiesced. And I probably did it because I already had the DX7 2FD, but one of the MT32s died pretty quickly thereafter. And back then, I just had no desire to open it up and see what was going on with it. It used an external power supply, so it would have been something other than the power supply, because I had 2 of them and I switched the power supply and that wasn't the problem. Then the other one started to develop problems shortly after that. The display started to get dim and wouldn't really work. And I sold it, I think, at a garage sale for like $5. And I told the guy that purchased it, I said, it's not really working quite right. He said, I don't care, I can fix it. I go, okay. But in a way, this was kind of on me. I shouldn't have done this deal. It was a bad deal. And I just wouldn't recommend the MT32 to anybody anyway. Get a D50, or I had 2 D550s for a while, which is the rack mount version of a D50, and I still own one if I ever get it repaired. Next up, number 2, Focusrite Twin Track Pro Platinum. This is a 2-channel preamp, and it's in my rack over here, and you probably can't see it from this angle. A very nice preamp for its price point, that is. It's not a Manley Slam, but it's also not $5,000. I think I paid something like $550 for it. And it was reconditioned, and practically it was basically new and then reconditioned pretty quickly after from being new. That should have been an indicator that I shouldn't have purchased it. But I did, and I had only 30 days to return it. And it started exhibiting problems, I would say, within a day or 2 of using it. It would have a kind of a digital noise that would be just a floor on both channels. That could be, I suppose, an op amp, or it could be a bad capacitor. I've opened up the unit and looked at it, and I can do basic electronics, you know, recapping of a power supply, but I just took a quick look at it, and there's nothing that is obvious to me, and so it's just beyond my pea-brain ability to repair it. I should have returned it, and that's on me. It's a nice preamp, and one day I should get it fixed. If I turn it on and use it, it usually takes several hours before that problem develops. And then if you turn it off and turn it back on, it'll work for an hour or 2 again, and then it'll happen. It's just not worth risking having it happen. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen on that really perfect take that you do. And so you would regret that. I've done a lot of demo stuff, or I've did a lot of demo stuff after getting it and just running direct right into the RME UFX, which has 4 XLRs on the front panel. And so my vocal chain was essentially a U87 directly into the RME going into Cubase. And some people had asked, you know, what's your vocal chain? It sounds really good and very open. I said, it's just a U87 into the RME UFX. And they're like, you're kidding. You don't have a preamp on it? I said, just the preamps in the RME. And people have been pretty impressed about that. And it wasn't my vocal performance, that's for sure. I mean, I have a very vanilla voice, but it works. I really should get it repaired. I like it, and it's got an optical compressor on her. It's got an optical compressor on it, and it's 2 channels. So I should use it, but, you know, one day. Number 1, probably no surprises here if you've watched the channel for any length of the time, the Roland D70. I don't own this anymore. I just sold it to a guy, and I told him it was working perfectly and there was no problems. No, I'm just kidding. I told him it wasn't working, and he knew. He's watched the channel, and he knew that the bottom half of the keyboard wasn't working. It's essentially mint cosmetic condition. The backlight was out on it, and it's a high voltage backlight, he was telling me. So we're staying in touch, and he said that if he gets it working, he would bring it over and I could do the episode that I never really did on it, where I could actually get to play it and demo it for you. So that would be interesting. So I'm hopeful that he will be able to get it working. so many problems with the D70. Where do you start? The red glue issue. That's one problem. The weights, it's a semi-weighted keyboard, and on the keys they glued in little metal weights underneath, and the glue over time turns back into a kind of a red goo. And I had the keyboard open one time and there was no red glue issue in there. And he's already had it open, and he let me know that the red glue issue is starting to take effect. And so I'm really sorry about that. He said it's not bad and hopefully it won't be a big deal, but it wasn't there before when I had it open. Then also the LFO just slows down if you send it too many MIDI notes in a multi-timbral setup. Also the LFO slowing down is one thing. The other thing is sometimes it'll just die on you. If you send it too much MIDI information, it just says, not doing it. So that's pretty bad too. The display, the backlight seems to go out with amazing regularity. Maybe people I've spoken to were just unlucky. And it is a high power display. I'm not sure if that also relates to the LED backlight. I don't know exactly how that works. But there's replacement OLED screens that you can buy for them, but they're really expensive, like $100. And I don't think anybody really wants to do that. But I gave them a really good price on it. And you can find all about that in my Purge update, which is coming. I'll tell you all the money I've made selling all this gear. And it's a substantial amount, several thousands of dollars. And what I might spend that money on, I probably will buy some hardware. As a friend of mine reminded me, I told him not to sell all his hardware and buy software. So we'll definitely talk about that. The D70, just the keys failing is just a big deal. The traces, they seem to break all by themselves. I purchased this keyboard, turned it on. I was so excited to get it, and it's really on me. I met this guy when I first moved to California in 1991, and he had one keyboard, and he brought it over, and it was a D70. And he said he got it on a closeout at a really good deal. Now, I had Roland S550 samplers, and I had synthesizers. I had the AX80 and the Juno 106, but I didn't have a Rompler or anything that had LA synthesis and kind of operated like a Rompler. And so I just remembered it just sounding so great, the D70. And it has 76 keys, which is a big plus. And so I'd always had that memory in the back of my head that it was really, really good. So I went and bought one about 8 years ago. I got it, played it for about an hour and thought, my memory had kind of persuaded me to buy it, but it really wasn't that good anymore. At that time I owned a D550. Actually, I owned two of them. And like I said, I still own one of them that I need to get repaired. So it's not a D50. I think on the motherboard it actually says U220, but it's been a while, like I said, since I had it open. I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't say D70 on it. So not my best purchase. And the last thing I should ever do is buy something because of the sentimental attachment or the fact that I'm reminiscing about it. I had an hour's worth of fun. Was it worth $450, the $450 I paid? No. And the gentleman that I sold it to got it for significantly less than that. I do have one dishonorable mention. This is the bad list, so it's not an honorable mention, it's a dishonorable mention. And that might be a surprise to some people. It's Cubase, but it's Cubase VST 3.6 and VST 5. I first got into Cubase in 1998, so I've been doing Cubase for 27 years. That's a long time. And when I purchased Cubase, and a friend of mine purchased Cubase at the same time when we got our Mo2 core systems, we purchased VST 3.6, Virtual Studio Technology. And the way Steinberg operated back then, this is the way I see it anyway. They would release a version like version 3, and it would have 100 bugs in it. And then the medium, the midway version would be 3.5 or 3.6, and they would fix half the bugs. And then they would move to 4. And then there would be, you would hope that all the bugs would get fixed, but they wouldn't. And then they moved to 5. And we had 3.6, and I think we started with 3.5, and it had so many bugs. Crashes were just constant. We were constantly saving. Now, I think part of the deal was they were very optimistic in what a computer could do back then as far as a PC computer or a Mac computer. They were incredibly underpowered for what we were really asking them to do this hard disk recording and also have all these MIDI tracks. And I think we were using Windows XP or Windows 7, and it was probably like a Pentium 2 or a Pentium 4, and that was like top of the line back then. But those computers by today's standards are just dogs. They're slower than molasses, So we were expecting a lot, but don't sell the software if it can't keep up. And my friend and I, we were constantly saving. It would crash during recording. It would crash during editing. It would just crash for no apparent reason. And it would be a hard lockup, and the only way to get out of it would be to reboot the computer. And if you hadn't saved, you would lose your work. I'm not sure if they had autosave back then, but we just got used to hitting Control S and saving continuously, because if you didn't, you would lose your work. Cubase now is a lot more robust. I don't know if that's an artifact of them being owned by Yamaha now and just having bigger budget, but I got back into using Cubase more full-time with 9.5. Then I think I moved to 10, then 11. I think I skipped 12, and I have 13 now, and I think they're on 14. And much better platform now, and I love it. I've always loved Cubase. I just love what you can do in it. And with all the different tools I have, like Touch Portal and my Stream Deck, it makes it so great to use and have a really great workflow. But in those early days with Cubase 3.5, 3.6, and 5, it was tough. And I think it was a disservice to the user to move on to the next version before they'd fixed all the issues. And what's interesting here, a little side note, is I actually wrote into Keyboard Magazine, and I think I'd done that twice as a subscriber to Keyboard Magazine. And I said, don't publish my name. I wouldn't want to upset anybody. But I really meant that tongue-in-cheek. I didn't mind if they published my name. And I said, I've just purchased VST from Cubase, and it's just filled with bugs. And then the next version they've just come out with, they've fixed some of the bugs, but not all of them. And they've introduced new bugs. I don't care about the features they're adding if they're not fixing the bugs. I need a platform that is reliable and solid. And that was what last week's episode was all about, stuff that just works. And now Cubase is solid. And I've had very few crashes. I think I've maybe had 3 across 9.5, 10, 11, and 13. That's not bad. That's really quite good. They're never at convenient times, but save often and you'll be a lot happier. What was interesting was Keyboard's response. And I don't know if Dominic Milano was the editor-in-chief back when I sent that letter to them. And they said, oh, Jeff, you got to understand this is complex software and bugs are to be expected. Maybe so, but not 50 or 100 bugs. Seriously? If that was a car in just about any other state, the Lemon Law would apply. You'd take it back and say, fix it. And they're not fixing every problem before they move on to the next version. They're forcing you to buy the next version, hoping that the bugs are fixed. And that was just upsetting me. So I'm trying to be polite about it, but it was frustrating in those early years. And I tried other programs. PowerTracks Pro wasn't bad, from that perspective. But Cubase was way ahead of everybody on the curve with VST instruments and VST effects. And I knew it was going to eventually mature and become the platform that a lot of people would want to be involved in. And I know there's people out there that love Reaper and Logic and Pro Tools, and those are great platforms too. And I've used some of those platforms because they're unavoidable in the business. You've got to use Pro Tools. But Cubase is really a different thing now. It's just so much better. But back then, not so great. All right, just another reminder, if you haven't watched last week's episode, which was the top 11 really good stuff, rather than this one, which is the not so good stuff. And also, this is also about lessons that I've learned along the way. You should potentially go back and watch last week's episode. I think that's just about it. I'm looking down the list here. I still have the 4070. I still have the Juno 106. I have some 2408s, but I'm not using them as a core system. I have a version 2 and a version 3. I actually bought 2 more version 2s, but the first one the guy sent me didn't work, and the second one he sent me had problems too, so neither of those are working, and those need to go in the dumpster. Let's see what else. The XT that my friend purchased is sitting over there. The Twin Track Pro Platinum is in the rack. And the D70, I managed to pull one off on somebody else. He's going to enjoy it. He's an electrical engineer. He should be able to fix it. I don't think he'll have any troubles doing that. And he'll have a very good synthesizer. And it may not be incredibly reliable, but he'll be able to fix it if it dies. Thanks for your time today. I really do appreciate it. Take care, and I will be back in another episode soon. Bye now.